"Get out of my sight, you worthless beggar!" The shout echoed through the entire office like a whip. 40 employees stopped working to watch Marcus Redfield, regional manager, publicly humiliate a woman in front of everyone. Catherine Sterling stood by the auxiliary desk, wearing her worn black blazer and shoes that had seen better days. Her cheeks burned with shame as looks of pity and mockery pierced her like daggers. "People like you shouldn't even step foot in the lobby of this building," Marcus continued with a cruel smile that froze the blood. "Summit is a serious company, not a shelter for failures." Then the unthinkable happened. Marcus walked to the water dispenser, filled a cleaning bucket that was next to the copy machine, and returned with calculated steps toward Catherine. The office fell into a deadly silence. Everyone knew something terrible was about to happen, but no one dared to intervene. "Let's see if this helps you understand your place in this world," Marcus murmured with a sadistic smile. And without warning, he dumped the entire bucket of cold water over Catherine. The water soaked her completely. Her blazer stuck to her body, her hair dripped, her shoes filled with water. Ice-cold drops ran down her face, mixing with tears of humiliation she couldn't contain. 40 employees watched in absolute shock as Catherine stood there, soaked and trembling, but with a dignity that not all the water in the world could wash away. No one in that office could imagine they were witnessing the most brutal humiliation ever committed against the most powerful woman in the building. No one knew that this soaked and trembling, worthless beggar held in her hands the power to change their lives forever. The Twin Towers of Summit Corporation rose majestically in the heart of Manhattan's financial district, reflecting the morning sun in their glass windows. Inside those corporate walls, where millions of dollars moved every day, a story had just begun that no one would ever forget. What happened next changed everything forever. If this story has already touched your heart in this first minute, subscribe to the channel. Here you'll find stories that heal, inspire, and make you believe in human goodness again. But to understand how we got to that moment of brutal humiliation, we need to go back 3 hours. It was 6:30 in the morning when Catherine Sterling woke up in her Upper East Side penthouse. 3,000-square-foot apartment, panoramic city view, artwork worth more than an average house. But that morning she didn't dress in her designer suits or Italian shoes. She put on the black blazer she had bought at a thrift store, the synthetic leather shoes she had deliberately worn down, the imitation purse that completed her perfect disguise. For 5 years, since inheriting her father's business empire, Catherine had run Summit Corporation from the shadows, video conferences from private offices, meetings where only her voice was heard through speakers. To the company's employees, she was a mystery, a signature on documents, a corporate legend. But Catherine had a suspicion that had troubled her for months: rumors of abuse of power, anonymous complaints reaching her desk about managers who mistreated lower-ranking employees, stories of humiliations that seemed too brutal to be true. Today she wanted to see the truth with her own eyes. At 8 a.m., she walked through the main doors of her own building as a stranger. The security guard didn't even look up. The executives in the lobby ignored her completely. She was invisible, exactly as she had planned. On the 17th floor, the Human Resources Department buzzed with morning activity. Emily Carter, 24 years old, received her with a professional smile that didn't completely hide her surprise at the new temp's modest appearance. "Good morning. I'm Catherine Sterling. I'm here for the temporary receptionist position. Of course we were expecting you. Welcome to Summit." Emily guided her to an auxiliary desk in the common area. An old computer, an uncomfortable chair, a direct view of the copy machine. The contrast with the executive desks was brutal and deliberate. "This is where you'll be working. The duties are basic: answering phones, receiving visitors, filing documents, nothing complicated." Catherine nodded while silently observing the environment. Dorothy Williams, a 60-year-old secretary with perfectly arranged gray hair, greeted her kindly from her desk. There was something maternal in her look, as if she recognized in Catherine someone who needed protection in that merciless corporate world. David Richardson, 45-year-old head of security, passed through the area and observed her discreetly. There was something about this woman that didn't fit. Her posture was too upright for someone in her apparent economic situation. Her manners too refined. Her way of observing the environment too analytical. During the first hour, everything proceeded normally. Catherine answered calls, organized documents, smiled politely at passing employees. Some treated her with indifference, others with condescension, but no one with cruelty. Until 9:15 a.m. arrived. The elevator doors opened, and Marcus Redfield appeared like a storm dressed in a suit. 42 years of corporate ego and misused power. His slicked back hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights. His Swiss watch caught the light flashes like a beacon of arrogance. Marcus had built his career on a simple philosophy. Respect is earned through fear, and fear is cultivated by humiliating those who can't defend themselves. His eyes immediately fixed on Catherine, the new one, the one who didn't know the rules of the game. "Who's that?" he asked Emily, pointing at Catherine as if she were an object out of place. "That's Catherine, the new temporary receptionist." Marcus approached the auxiliary desk with the calculated slowness of a predator. Catherine looked up, held his gaze without blinking. That was her first mistake. In Marcus's world, low-ranking employees don't look managers in the eye. "Temporary?" His voice had the edge of a blade. "Let's see. Where are you from?" "I have reception experience, sir." "That's not what I asked." Marcus took Catherine's resume and leafed through it with disdain. "I'm asking where you're from." "Because looking at you, you don't seem like the type of person who normally works at Summit." The atmosphere in the office changed. Conversations stopped. Keyboards fell silent. Emily tensed in her chair. Dorothy looked up with concern. Catherine maintained her composure. "I need the job, sir." "Ah, of course. You need the job." Marcus smiled cruelly. "And I suppose you think a company like Summit is your salvation, right? That here, you'll find the stability you clearly haven't been able to get elsewhere." Each word was a calculated stab. Catherine felt how the humiliation spread through the office like a silent poison. "I just want to do my job well," she responded with dignity. That answer ignited something malevolent in Marcus's eyes. Dignity in the poor infuriated him. It was as if they refused to accept their place in the natural order of things. And then came the moment that would change everything. Marcus straightened up, looked around to make sure he had an audience, and shouted the words that would resonate forever in those walls. "Get out of my sight, you worthless beggar." But verbal humiliation wasn't enough for him. His thirst for power and cruelty needed more. He walked to the water dispenser with calculated steps, filled a cleaning bucket that was next to the copy machine, and returned toward Catherine. The office fell into a deadly silence. 40 employees watched in horror as Marcus approached Catherine with the bucket full of cold water. "Let's see if this helps you understand your place in this world," he murmured with a sadistic smile. And without warning, he dumped the entire bucket of water over Catherine. The water soaked her completely. Her blazer stuck to her body, her hair dripped, her shoes filled with water. Ice-cold drops ran down her face, mixing with tears of humiliation she couldn't contain. The silence that followed was deafening. 40 pairs of eyes fixed on Catherine, who stood there soaked and trembling, but with a dignity that not all the water in the world could wash away. But in her eyes there was something Marcus couldn't see, a spark that wasn't of defeat, but of determination. Even soaked, even humiliated in the most degrading way possible, there was something unbreakable in her gaze. Emily was the first to react. She got up from her desk with tears in her eyes and ran to the bathroom to get towels. Dorothy froze, but her hands trembled with indignation while her eyes filled with tears. David, who had come up just in time to witness the scene, felt a rage he hadn't experienced in years. "Here you go," Emily whispered, offering towels to Catherine. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Catherine took the towels with trembling hands and dried her face, but her voice came out firm when she responded. "Thank you, Emily. It's not your fault." Marcus observed the scene with perverse satisfaction before returning to his office as if nothing had happened. For him, it had been just another demonstration of power. For everyone else, it had been the most brutal humiliation they had ever witnessed in a corporate environment. What none of them knew was that they had just physically humiliated the woman who had the power to change their destinies forever. What will Catherine do after this public humiliation? How will the witnesses of this brutal scene react? The answer will surprise you. The following days were a calculated nightmare. Marcus had found his new favorite toy, and the water bucket humiliation had been just the beginning. Catherine had to change clothes in the employee bathroom that first afternoon, using a spare outfit that Dorothy had discreetly gotten her from the lost and found closet. The experience of being soaked, trembling, and humiliated in front of 40 people had marked her deeply, but had also strengthened her determination. Every morning, Marcus arrived with a new way to degrade her. He ordered her to clean coffee stains he himself, accidentally, spilled on his desk. He made her reprint documents over and over for non-existent errors, and he constantly reminded her of the water episode with comments like, "Has your clothing dried yet?" or "Did you bring an umbrella today?" "Hey, Temp," he yelled Wednesday morning from across the office. "Come here, right now." Catherine got up from her desk and walked toward him. 40 employees pretended to work while watching what had become a daily spectacle of cruelty. Everyone vividly remembered the image of Catherine soaked and trembling, and no one wanted to be next. "See this?" Marcus pointed to an ink stain on his desk. "Your job is to keep this office clean, but it seems you can't even do that right." "Sir, I didn't—" Catherine began. "Don't interrupt me!" His voice cut through the air like a whip. "Clean this, and do it right, because if I see another stain, you're out of here." Catherine took a cloth and cleaned the stain in silence. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from contained rage. Every fiber of her being wanted to shout who she really was. But she held back. She needed to see how far the cruelty would go. Emily watched from her desk with a knotted stomach. Since the water bucket episode, she couldn't sleep well. Every humiliation toward Catherine made her feel complicit through her silence. She had tried to intervene once, but Marcus had put her in her place with a veiled threat about her future in the company. Dorothy Williams, from her corner, had intensified her documentation after witnessing the physical humiliation. Dates, times, witnesses, and now also discreet photos taken with her phone. 25 years at Summit had taught her that abusers like Marcus eventually hang themselves with their own rope. But the bucket incident had crossed a line she had never seen crossed. But it was David Richardson who was most furious. The head of security couldn't forget the image of Catherine soaked and trembling. In his 20 years protecting corporate buildings, he had seen workplace harassment, but never such brutal and calculated physical humiliation. Thursday afternoon, David decided to conduct a discreet investigation. He accessed the employee system to review Catherine's file. What he found left him frozen. There was no file, no signed contract, no verified references, no documented selection process. It was as if Catherine had appeared out of nowhere, and someone very powerful had authorized her entry without following any protocol. David reviewed the security cameras from the day Catherine arrived. He saw her enter through the main door, but there was no record of who had authorized her. Even stranger, her temporary access card had permissions for floors that not even middle managers could visit. "Something doesn't add up," David murmured while reviewing the videos once more. That same afternoon, Catherine demonstrated again that there was something different about her. Marcus had sent her to deliver an urgent document to the 25th floor, assuming she would get lost in the maze of executive offices. But Catherine returned in record time. "How did you get back so fast?" Marcus asked with suspicion. "I took the executive elevator in the East Wing. It's more direct." The answer left Marcus disconcerted. Basic-level employees didn't know the building's internal layout with that detail, much less the exclusive elevators for executives. "How do you know about that elevator?" Catherine realized her mistake, but responded naturally. "Someone in security showed me the way." It was a perfect lie. Impossible to verify without creating more problems. But Dorothy had heard the conversation, and one more piece of the puzzle fit in her mind. This woman knew the building like someone who had worked there for years, or like someone who had access to privileged information. Friday, Marcus's cruelty reached a new level. During a meeting with important clients, he yelled at Catherine from across the conference room, "You, don't you see we have important visitors? Bring coffee for everyone, and make it from the good machine, not the garbage you drink." Catherine served the coffee in silence while Marcus continued, "Excuse us, gentlemen. Temporary staff sometimes don't understand the standards of a serious company." The clients felt uncomfortable with the public humiliation, but said nothing. In the corporate world, hierarchy was sacred. But when Catherine was serving the coffee, something extraordinary happened. One of the clients looked her in the eyes, and his expression changed completely. "Excuse me, haven't we met before?" the man asked in a confused tone. Catherine held his gaze a moment too long before responding. "I don't think so, sir." The client kept watching her as she left the room. There was something familiar about this woman, something he couldn't identify but that troubled him deeply. Marcus noticed the exchange, and a seed of paranoia began to germinate in his mind. Why would an important client show interest in a temporary receptionist? That night, Catherine returned to her penthouse exhausted physically and emotionally. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and could still feel the cold water running down her body, the humiliation burning in her cheeks. But she also saw something else. Absolute confirmation of what she had suspected. Her company was infected by a toxic culture that not only allowed psychological abuse, but had escalated to physical humiliation. Good employees like Emily lived terrified. Veterans like Dorothy documented abuses without being able to act. And upright people like David carried guilt that wasn't theirs to bear. The image of herself soaked and trembling in front of 40 employees would be the catalyst for the biggest transformation in Summit Corporation's history. She had seen enough. It was time to act. She took her phone and dialed a number that only 5 people in the world knew. "James, it's me. I need you to organize an emergency meeting with all executive staff for Monday. Yes, include the regional managers, everyone." "And James?" "It's time for them to meet their real boss." On the other end of the line, James Sullivan, her 37-year-old personal assistant, immediately understood the tone of her voice. "Problems, Catherine? Problems that will be solved very soon. Next Monday, Catherine will make the most impactful decision of her career. But first, someone else will discover the truth about her identity." The weekend passed like a silent storm. Catherine dedicated those 48 hours to meticulously planning what would be the most important Monday in Summit Corporation's history. But she wasn't the only one who had spent the weekend thinking about the previous week's events. David Richardson couldn't sleep. His security instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong with Catherine Sterling. Sunday night, he decided to do something that was technically outside his duties: investigate thoroughly. Using his contacts in the banking and national identification system, David began searching for information about Catherine Sterling. What he found left him breathless. Catherine Sterling didn't exist, not as a 34-year-old woman with the work experience she had declared. There were no previous employment records at the companies she mentioned, no credit history, no digital trace whatsoever. It was as if this woman had been created specifically to infiltrate Summit. But David's investigation took an unexpected turn when he decided to search just the name Catherine Sterling without age or work experience filters. What appeared on his screen almost made him fall out of his chair. Catherine Sterling, 34 years old, president and CEO of Summit Corporation, heiress to Robert Sterling's business empire, estimated fortune of $200 million. Residence, penthouse in the Upper East Side, New York. David printed the corporate profile photo and compared it with images from the previous week's security cameras. There was no doubt. It was the same woman. The temporary receptionist that Marcus had been humiliating for a week was the owner of the entire company. David felt his blood run cold. What was Summit's president doing working as a temporary receptionist? And why was she allowing Marcus to treat her that way? There was only one logical explanation. Catherine was conducting an undercover investigation. David immediately knew he had a decision to make. He could stay quiet and wait to see what happened, or he could act. But the image of Catherine soaked and humiliated wouldn't let him sleep. His conscience didn't allow him to doubt for long. Monday morning, David arrived at the building 2 hours before the rest of the staff. He needed to talk to Catherine before Marcus arrived. He had to apologize for not intervening when he saw her humiliated in such a brutal way. At 7:30 a.m., he saw Catherine enter through the main doors in her usual disguise. David intercepted her in the lobby. "Mrs. Sterling, could I speak with you for a moment?" Catherine stopped dead. The way David had addressed her changed everything. Not Catherine or Miss. Mrs. Sterling with the respect owed to a president. "I think there's some confusion, Mr. David Richardson, head of security. And there's no confusion, ma'am. I know exactly who you are." They looked at each other in silence for a moment that seemed eternal. Catherine evaluated her options. She could continue pretending, but the expression in David's eyes told her it was already too late for that. "What do you want, David?" "I want to know if you're safe, ma'am. I want to know if you need protection. And I want to ask your forgiveness for not intervening when that bastard threw water on you. I haven't been able to sleep for 5 days for not doing anything to stop him." The sincerity and pain in David's voice moved Catherine. For a week she had seen cruelty, indifference, and cowardice. Finally, she found someone with integrity who felt responsible for not acting. "David, you don't have to apologize to me. You didn't create that situation. But I appreciate your concern." Catherine paused. "What I'm doing is necessary, David. I need you to keep my secret until I decide to reveal it." "Of course, ma'am. But can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "What's going to happen to Marcus Redfield? Because after what he did to you, after such brutal humiliation, that man doesn't deserve to remain in a position of power." Catherine smiled for the first time in a week. It wasn't a cruel smile, but one of quiet justice. "Marcus is going to learn a lesson he'll never forget, but not in the way he would expect from someone like me." David nodded. "If you need anything at all, just tell me. There is something you can do. This afternoon, James Sullivan, my personal assistant, will come. Grant him access without asking questions. And David, what you're going to witness today will change this company forever." As Catherine went up to the 17th floor, David remained in the lobby with a mixture of admiration and nervousness. It was going to be a historic day. On the 17th floor, the morning began in the usual way. Marcus arrived at 9:15 with his usual arrogance, immediately looking for Catherine to begin his daily routine of humiliations. But something was different. Dorothy Williams had a strange smile on her lips. Emily seemed more nervous than normal. And when David came up to the floor for a routine security inspection, his presence added a different tension to the environment. "Temp!" Marcus yelled from his office. "Come here! Now!" Catherine got up and walked toward Marcus's office. But this time, David followed her discreetly and stayed near the door. "Did you see this report?" Marcus waved some papers in front of Catherine. "It's full of errors. Is this how you plan to work in my department?" "Sir, I didn't do that report. It's from last Friday before I arrived." "I don't care. Now it's your responsibility. Fix it, all of it, and make sure there's not a single error, because if there is, you're out of here." Catherine took the documents and returned to her desk, but as she reviewed the papers, she realized something. They weren't accidental errors. They were deliberate changes that made the numbers not add up. Someone had altered the report to create financial problems in the department. Marcus wasn't just an abuser. He was also a thief. Catherine discreetly reviewed the digital files of the original report. She confirmed her suspicions. Marcus had been manipulating figures for months, diverting funds from departmental budgets to accounts he controlled. For the first time in a week, Catherine smiled genuinely. She not only had grounds to fire Marcus for abuse, she also had evidence of corporate fraud. At 2 p.m., the elevator doors opened and a man appeared who made the entire office fall silent. James Sullivan, 37 years old, $5,000 suit, presence that commanded immediate respect. His official title was Executive Assistant to the President, but everyone at Summit knew he was the right hand of the company's mysterious owner. If James was there, something very important was about to happen. "Good afternoon," James said with a voice that cut through the silence like a sword. "I need to speak with Regional Manager Marcus Redfield." Marcus came out of his office with a mixture of confusion and panic. James Sullivan never visited operational departments. His presence could only mean trouble. "Mr. Sullivan, what a surprise. How can I help you?" "Mr. Redfield, by direct instruction from the President, your presence is required at an emergency meeting. 45th floor main conference room in 30 minutes. May I ask what this is about?" James looked at him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's about the future of your career at this company, Mr. Redfield." Marcus felt the floor move beneath his feet. What had he done wrong? Who had complained about him? How had his behavior reached the President? As Marcus headed to the elevator with trembling legs, James approached Catherine's desk discreetly. "Ma'am," he whispered to her, "everything's ready. Are you sure you want to do it this way?" "Completely sure, James. It's time for Marcus to meet his real boss." In 30 minutes, Marcus Redfield will face the most devastating truth of his career. What he doesn't know is that the woman he humiliated for a week will be waiting for him in that conference room. The conference room on the 45th floor was a temple of corporate power. Mahogany table that could seat 20 people, windows offering a panoramic view of New York, cutting-edge technology for international video conferences. The walls were decorated with Summit Corporation's achievements, million-dollar contracts, international expansions, business recognitions. Marcus entered the room with his heart pounding like a hammer. He had never been on this floor. Regional managers like him didn't have access to the heights of corporate power. The room was empty except for James Sullivan, who was reviewing some documents with the calm of someone in control of the situation. "Sit down, Mr. Redfield." Marcus took a seat in one of the side chairs, assuming he had no right to the main table. His hands were sweating as he tried to imagine what had motivated this meeting. "May I ask who else is coming?" His voice sounded weaker than he intended. "Just one more person, someone who has been observing your performance very closely lately." At exactly 3 p.m., the doors to the room opened. Marcus expected to see some vice president or executive director enter. What he didn't expect was to see Catherine enter. His Catherine, the temporary receptionist, the worthless beggar he had been humiliating for a week. But this Catherine was different. She wore a designer suit that cost more than Marcus's monthly salary. Her shoes were authentic Italian. Her hair was perfectly styled by a professional stylist. And on her wrist gleamed a watch that Marcus recognized as a limited edition Patek Philippe. She walked to the head of the table with the confidence of someone who belongs there. She sat in the main chair, clasped her hands on the table, and looked directly at Marcus. The silence extended for 30 seconds that felt like an eternity. "Hello, Marcus," Catherine said with a voice that was the same but sounded completely different. There was no more submission, only pure authority. Marcus looked at her with his mouth open, as if he were seeing a ghost. His brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. I don't understand. What's going on here? Why are you—" "Why am I here?" Catherine smiled without warmth. "This is my conference room, Marcus. This is my building. This is my company." The words hit Marcus like an avalanche. His world crumbled in real time. "My full name is Catherine Sterling. I am the president, CEO, and majority owner of Summit Corporation. And for the past week, I've had the—" How shall I put it? The privilege of working under your supervision. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. His hands began to tremble uncontrollably. But, you worked. I didn't know. No, you didn't know. And that's exactly the point. Catherine leaned back in her chair. For 5 years, I've run this company from the shadows. I've heard rumors about abuse of power, about managers who mistreat employees. But rumors are just rumors. I wanted to see reality with my own eyes. James opened a folder and placed several photographs on the table. They were captures from security cameras showing Marcus humiliating Catherine during the previous week. "Get out of my sight, you worthless beggar," Catherine read from a report. "People like you shouldn't even step foot in the lobby of this building. Summit is a serious company, not a shelter for failures." And then, Catherine paused, her voice hardened. "Then you threw a bucket of cold water on me in front of 40 employees, as if I were an animal." Each phrase Catherine repeated was like a slap to Marcus. Remembering his own words directed at the woman who now held his fate in her hands made him feel physically sick. "Ma'am, Mrs. Sterling, I didn't know. If I had known who you were—" "Oh, really?" Catherine's voice hardened. "If you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently? And what about all the other people who aren't me? What about Emily, who lives terrified of contradicting you? What about Dorothy, who documents your abuses because she has no one to report them to? What about all the employees you've humiliated simply because you could?" Marcus had no answer. For the first time in years, he faced someone who had more power than him, and the experience was destroying him. "But that's not all, Marcus." Catherine signaled James, who placed more documents on the table. "I also discovered something interesting while reviewing that report you ordered me to correct." The documents showed evidence of Marcus's financial manipulations. Unauthorized transfers, altered invoices, diversion of departmental funds. For the past 18 months, you've stolen approximately $43,000 from departmental budgets. Small amounts, distributed intelligently to avoid triggering automatic audits, but enough to finance your new car, your watch, and those Miami vacations you officially can't afford on your salary. Marcus felt like he was going to vomit. He hadn't just lost his job, he had lost his freedom. "Mrs. Sterling, I can explain. I can return the money. It's been a misunderstanding." "No, Marcus. It hasn't been a misunderstanding. It's been a choice. For years you chose to abuse your power because you thought there would be no consequences. You chose to steal because you thought no one would notice. You chose to humiliate innocent people because you thought your position gave you that right." Catherine stood up from her chair and walked to the window. The view of New York spread before her like a kingdom that effectively belonged to her. "I have 2 options, Marcus. I can call the police right now and press charges for corporate fraud. Or I can handle this internally. Please, Mrs. Sterling, please, I'll do anything. I'll return every penny. I'll change my behavior, I swear." Catherine turned and looked at him with an expression that wasn't hatred, but deep disappointment. "You know what's saddest about all this, Marcus? That you needed to see me dressed in designer clothes, sitting in this chair, to treat me with respect. Respect shouldn't depend on the clothes I wear or the position I hold. It should be basic, human, unconditional." The door to the room opened, and David Richardson entered accompanied by 2 private security officers. "David will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. The Human Resources Department has already been notified of your immediate termination. Your access to all systems has been revoked. And Marcus—" Catherine paused. "If ever, at any company where you work in the future, I find out you've mistreated any employee, I'll make sure you face the full legal consequences for the fraud you committed here." Marcus stood up, staggering. 8 years of corporate career vanished in 30 minutes. "I can't believe this is happening," he murmured. "Well, believe it," Catherine said. "And the next time you see someone who looks like they need a job, remember that you never know who that person really is. Remember that human dignity is non-negotiable. And remember that always, Always. Someone is watching. David escorted Marcus out of the room. His steps echoed in the hallway like those of a man walking toward his execution. Catherine remained alone in the conference room, looking out the window. She had won. Justice had been served. But she didn't feel victorious. She felt sad about everything she had to witness. James approached her. "How do you feel, ma'am?" "Like I just operated on a cancer in my own company. Necessary, but painful." "What's next?" Catherine straightened up. Her expression changed from melancholy to determination. "Now we go to the 17th floor. It's time for me to officially meet my employees, and it's time for them to meet the changes that are coming. The transformation of Summit Corporation is about to begin. But how will the employees react when they discover the truth about their new boss?" At 4 p.m. on the strangest Monday in Summit Corporation's history, all the employees on the 17th floor received a simultaneous message on their computers. "Mandatory meeting, main conference room, 4:15 p.m., by order of the president." No one understood what was happening. Emily looked at her screen with confusion. Dorothy discreetly stored her notebook in her desk. Employees whispered among themselves, trying to decipher the mystery. Marcus had disappeared after his mysterious meeting on the 45th floor. His office was being cleaned by security personnel. His personal belongings had been packed in cardboard boxes. At exactly 4:15 p.m., everyone was gathered in the conference room. 40 nervous employees speculating about reorganizations, mass layoffs, or changes in corporate structure. The doors opened and James Sullivan entered. The silence was instantaneous. The presence of the president's executive assistant in an operational department could only mean something historic. "Good afternoon," James said. "I know these have been confusing days for all of you. The changes you've witnessed are related to an investigation that has been conducted by the company's president." Emily felt her heart race. An investigation? About what? About whom? For the past week, the president and CEO of Summit Corporation has been working among you undercover, observing the department's internal dynamics, evaluating leadership, and documenting the real corporate culture versus the company's official culture. Murmurs filled the room. The president had been among them? How? When? Who was it? What she discovered has motivated her to make immediate and irreversible decisions about the future of this department and of the entire company. James walked toward the doors of the room. "With great pleasure, allow me to officially introduce Catherine Sterling, President, CEO, and owner of Summit Corporation." The doors opened, and Catherine entered the room. She wasn't the Catherine they had known that week. This was a transformed woman. Designer suit radiating power and elegance. Perfectly styled hair, posture that commanded immediate respect. But the eyes were the same. The eyes that had endured a week of humiliations in silence. The impact was devastating. Emily brought her hands to her mouth, stifling a cry of surprise. Dorothy smiled with a mixture of admiration and vindication. The other employees looked at each other, trying to process the impossible. The temporary receptionist. The woman Marcus had humiliated with cold water, the worthless beggar who had been left soaked in front of everyone, was the owner of everything. Catherine walked to the front of the room and stood before her employees. Employees who now looked at her with a mixture of terror, respect, and amazement. "Good afternoon," she said with a voice that was familiar but completely different. "I believe you all deserve an explanation." The silence was so dense it could be cut with a knife. "For the past months, I've received anonymous reports about abuse of power in different departments of this company. Stories of mistreated employees, of managers who abuse their authority, of a toxic culture that completely contradicts the values that Summit Corporation claims to represent." Catherine paused, allowing her words to resonate. "As president of this company, those reports presented me with a dilemma. I could conduct a traditional corporate investigation with questionnaires, formal interviews, and standard protocols. Or I could see the truth with my own eyes. Catherine began walking slowly across the front of the room, maintaining eye contact with each employee. I chose the second option. I decided to infiltrate as a temporary employee to observe how the power culture really functions in my own company when they think no one important is watching. Dorothy nodded discreetly. Everything made sense now. The dignified posture, the knowledge of the building, the way she handled pressure. What I witnessed during this week exceeded my worst expectations. I saw a regional manager systematically humiliate an employee simply because he could. I saw him throw water on me as if I were an animal, in front of 40 witnesses who were paralyzed by fear. I saw honest workers living terrified to express opinions or defend what's right. I saw a culture where abuse of power wasn't just tolerated, but was used as entertainment. Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. The guilt for not defending Catherine was consuming her. But I also saw positive things. I saw employees like Dorothy, who silently document injustices with the hope that someone will eventually hear them. I saw workers like David, our head of security, who, when he discovered my identity, his first concern was my safety, not his own job. David, standing by the door, felt relieved and proud simultaneously. I saw young employees like Emily who clearly wanted to do the right thing but feared retaliation for defending a coworker. Emily couldn't contain herself anymore. She stood up from her chair with tears running down her cheeks. "Mrs. Sterling, forgive me. Forgive me for not defending you. Forgive me for being a coward. I knew what Marcus was doing was wrong, but I was afraid of losing my job. When he threw that water on you, I wanted to scream, I wanted to stop him, but I froze. There's no excuse for my silence." Emily's brutal honesty broke something in the atmosphere. Other employees began moving uncomfortably in their chairs, facing their own silent complicity. Catherine approached Emily with a soft expression. "Emily, look at me." She waited until the young woman looked up. "You don't have to apologize to me. You didn't create this toxic environment. You didn't establish a culture where defending yourself means risking your livelihood. That responsibility is mine as the leader of this company." Catherine addressed the entire group again. "Marcus Redfield no longer works at Summit Corporation. He has been fired for abuse of power and for corporate fraud. But the problem wasn't just Marcus. The problem was a system that allowed people like him to operate without consequences." James approached and handed Catherine a folder. "That's why, starting today, Summit Corporation will implement fundamental changes in its corporate culture." Catherine opened the folder and began reading. First, immediate establishment of a direct communication channel with the president. Any employee, regardless of level, will be able to report abuses directly to my office. There will be absolute guarantees against retaliation. The employees looked at each other in amazement. Direct access to the president was unheard of in a company of this size. Second, implementation of a mandatory ethical leadership program for all managers and supervisors. Those who don't complete the program or who fail ethical standards will be removed from positions of authority. Third, creation of a corporate culture committee composed of employees from all levels, with real power to investigate complaints and recommend corrective actions. Dorothy timidly raised her hand. "Yes, Dorothy?" "Mrs. Sterling, will these changes apply only to this department or to the entire company?" "Excellent question." Catherine smiled. "These changes will be implemented in all Summit Corporation offices, in the 5 countries where we operate. What I witnessed here confirmed that we need a complete transformation." An employee from the back raised his hand. "Sir?" "Charles Brooks, from the Analysis Department." "Charles, what's your question?" "Mrs. Sterling, how can we be sure these changes aren't just temporary? How do we know that in 6 months everything won't go back to how it was before?" It was a brave and direct question. Catherine appreciated it. "Charles, that's exactly the question I was hoping for. The answer is simple, because you're going to be the guardians of this transformation. The Corporate Culture Committee will have its own budget, real investigative authority, and will report directly to my office. It won't be a decorative committee. It will be a body of real power within the company." Catherine closed the folder and addressed Emily. Emily, I have a proposal for you. The young woman looked at her with surprise. I want to offer you the position of manager of the new corporate culture department. Your salary will triple. You'll have a team of 5 people under your supervision, and your job will be to ensure that what happened to me, that physical and psychological humiliation you witnessed, never happens to anyone in this company again. Emily was speechless, from receptionist to manager in a single conversation. I don't know what to say. I don't have the experience to... Emily, you have something more valuable than experience. You have conscience. You have empathy. And now that you've seen what can happen when good people stay silent, you have motivation. Those are the qualities I need in that position. Catherine then addressed Dorothy. Dorothy, after 25 years documenting problems without being able to act, would you be interested in being the senior coordinator of the Corporate Culture Committee? Your experience and institutional knowledge would be invaluable. Dorothy straightened in her chair with a dignity she hadn't shown in years. Mrs. Sterling, it would be an honor. Perfect. David, you'll be the security liaison for all committee investigations. And Charles, given your courage to ask difficult questions, I'd like you to consider being the representative for the analysis employees on the committee. In 10 minutes, Catherine had transformed not only the department structure, but the lives of the people who had shown integrity during her test. There's something else I want to share with you, Catherine said. During this week, when I was just a temporary receptionist, some of you treated me with kindness, without expecting anything in return. Dorothy offered me her lunch when she thought I didn't have money to buy food. David helped me with the computer system without being asked. Emily defended me to Marcus even when it could cost her problems. The mentioned employees felt recognized in a way they had never experienced. Those gestures of basic humanity meant more to me than all the financial reports I've reviewed this year. They reminded me why we build companies. To create value, not just economic, but human. Catherine walked toward the door, but stopped before leaving. One last thing. Tomorrow morning, Marcus will come to collect his last belongings. He'll be escorted by security and won't have access to any system. If any of you want to talk to me about your experiences with him, my door will be open. I'm not seeking revenge, but I do need to fully understand the scope of the problem to ensure it doesn't happen again. She left the room, leaving 40 employees in reflective silence. Their worlds had changed forever in 30 minutes. Emily approached Dorothy. Can you believe what just happened? Dorothy smiled with tears in her eyes. Child, in 25 years I've seen many things in this company, but I've never seen real justice. I've never seen someone with power use it to protect those who have no power. David joined the conversation. What she did was extraordinary. She voluntarily put herself in a vulnerable position to understand our vulnerabilities. Do you think she'll really change things? Emily asked. Look around you, Dorothy said. She already did. The transformation has begun, but the real test will be tomorrow, when Marcus returns to face the consequences of his actions. The twin towers of Summit Corporation gleamed under the morning sun of New York, but something was different. In the lobby, where once reigned the intimidating silence of corporate power, now there was an atmosphere of professional warmth. Catherine Sterling walked through the halls of her company, but not with the solitude of a distant leader. Employees from all levels greeted her with genuine respect, not with the servile fear that once characterized those interactions. On the 17th floor, Emily directed a corporate culture committee meeting. At 29 years old, she had become a respected leader whose department was consulted by companies throughout Latin America wanting to implement similar transformations. Good morning, everyone, Emily said while reviewing the agenda. Today, we'll review 3 cases: a complaint about inadequate communication in the marketing department, a suggestion to improve workspaces, and a mentoring proposal for new employees. Dorothy, now senior coordinator, took notes with the same meticulousness she had used for 25 years, but now her observations had the power to generate real changes. The marketing department case has already been resolved, Dorothy reported. An effective communication program was implemented, and both the supervisor and employees report significant improvements. In another part of the building, David Richardson conducted an orientation for new employees. His role had evolved from head of security to guardian of corporate culture, a title he wore with pride. At Summit Corporation, he told the 10 new employees, "Respect is not optional. It doesn't matter if you're the company president or if it's your first day as an assistant. Everyone deserves dignity. And if you ever feel that dignity is being violated, you have direct channels to report it without fear of retaliation." Among the new employees was Ryan Cooper, a 22-year-old who had arrived at the company with nervousness and modest expectations. He came from a low-income family, and this job represented his opportunity to change his life. "Is it true that the president actually personally responds to employee reports?" Ryan asked. David smiled. "She doesn't just respond to them. She reads them, investigates them, and acts on them. Mrs. Sterling learned 5 years ago that the only way to maintain a healthy culture is to stay connected with the real experiences of the people who work here." That afternoon, Catherine had her monthly meeting with the Corporate Culture Committee. It was a tradition she had maintained religiously for 5 years. "What's this month's report?" she asked as she sat in the same conference room where she had once confronted Marcus. Emily opened her laptop. "Excellent news, Mrs. Sterling. This month we had 0 reports of abuse of power. Job satisfaction indices are at their highest historical point, and we have a waiting list of people who want to work here specifically because of our corporate culture." "And the other offices?" "All 5 countries report similar numbers." "The program has become a model for the industry." Catherine nodded with satisfaction, but her expression became serious. "We must never forget that maintaining an ethical culture requires constant vigilance. Power corrupts when there are no controls, and we are our own control." Dorothy raised her hand. "Mrs. Sterling, I have a personal question, if you'll allow me." "Of course, Dorothy. Do you ever regret exposing yourself that way 5 years ago? It was an enormous risk for you." Catherine reflected for a moment. "Dorothy, that week was one of the most difficult of my life. Every humiliation, every slight, every moment of injustice hurt me deeply. But the moment with the water bucket, that changed something fundamental in me. It was also the most important week of my career as a leader." She stood and walked to the window, looking at the city that spread beneath her. "Before that experience, I led from an ivory tower. I made decisions based on reports, numbers, and polished presentations. But I didn't truly understand how my decisions affected the daily lives of the people who make this company work. I didn't understand that abuse of power could be so extreme, so dehumanizing." She turned toward the committee. "That week taught me that true leadership isn't about commanding from above. It's about understanding from below. It's about remembering that every employee is a complete person, with dignity, with dreams, with the same humanity as anyone sitting in an executive office." Emily nodded. "That lesson changed more than our company. It changed lives. Ryan, the new employee, told me yesterday that he'd never worked in a place where he felt truly respected." "And that's exactly the point," Catherine said. "When we create a culture of genuine respect, we don't just improve the work environment. We create a space where people can flourish, where they can give the best of themselves, where they can grow both professionally and personally." David intervened. "Mrs. Sterling, may I ask what happened to Marcus? I know it's not my business, but—" Catherine sighed. "Marcus found work at another company 6 months after his dismissal. But his reputation followed him. He lasted barely a year before being fired again for similar behavior. The last I heard, he was working in a position with no authority over other people. I hope he learned something from the experience." "Didn't you feel tempted to completely ruin his career?" Charles asked. "Revenge doesn't build anything positive," Catherine responded. "My goal was never to destroy Marcus. My goal was to protect future victims of people like him, and I believe we accomplished that." The meeting ended with plans for the following month. As the committee members left the room, Emily stayed behind. "Mrs. Sterling, there's something I've wanted to tell you for 5 years, but never found the right moment." "What is it, Emily?" "Thank you. Thank you for risking your comfort to discover our reality. Thank you for not staying silent when it would have been easier to ignore the problem. And thank you for trusting in me when I didn't trust in my own abilities." Catherine smiled with the warmth she had learned to show more frequently during these years. "Emily, you always had the abilities. You just needed the right environment to develop them. That's the most important lesson I learned. When you give people the tools and respect they deserve, they always exceed your expectations." That night, Catherine returned to her penthouse, but stopped in the building lobby. In a corner, almost hidden, there was a small bronze plaque she had installed the previous year. The plaque read, "In memory of all employees who have suffered abuse of power in silence, your dignity matters, your voice matters, you matter." Below was a phrase that had become Summit Corporation's unofficial motto. "Sometimes silences hold more power than shouts, and a look of respect is worth more than 1,000 orders." Catherine softly touched the plaque, remembering for a moment the pain of that week that changed everything. The cold water running down her body, the looks of pity and mockery, the humiliation that had burned in her cheeks. Then she smiled, because she knew that pain had given rise to something beautiful, a company where human dignity was non-negotiable. The next day, like every morning for the past 5 years, Catherine would enter her building not as a distant executive, but as a leader who had learned that true power comes from serving those who serve the company. And somewhere on the 17th floor, Ryan, the new employee, would work with the peace of mind of knowing that at Summit Corporation, his humanity was valued as much as his productivity. Because in the end, that had been the most important lesson. Successful companies aren't built on fear, but on respect. Not on humiliation, but on dignity. Not on power that destroys, but on power that elevates. And that lesson, learned through pain but applied with wisdom, had transformed not only a company, but the lives of everyone who worked in it. Deep down, Catherine knew that those 30 seconds under cold water had been the most valuable of her career. Not because of the suffering they caused her, but because of the transformation they generated. Every drop of that humiliation had become a drop of positive change that now flowed through the entire organization. Dorothy was right when she silently documented the abuses. Abusers eventually hang themselves with their own rope. But Catherine had learned something more. When you have the power to cut that rope, you also have the responsibility to use it to build bridges toward a better future. The final image was perfect. Catherine walking toward her penthouse while in the offices she left behind, employees from all levels worked in an environment where respect wasn't a privilege of the powerful, but a fundamental right of all human beings. 5 years after being soaked with cold water, Catherine had managed to create the warmest and most humane company in all of North America. If this story touched your heart, share it. Because somewhere there's someone who needs to remember that their dignity matters, that their voice has power, and that always, always, there's hope for change. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that restore faith in humanity and demonstrate that justice, though sometimes delayed, always arrives.